go.
Okay, people. So this needs to be more of a conversation. Jeremy, Steve, and I don't need much to just get going. So you just need to say a word, and then we'll just take it from there. If anybody wants to join us on the panel, click the share button, or you can start your questions on the chat. But it will be better if you just jump in quickly. So, Jeremy, what do you want to start with?
Well, I kind of wanted to ask the audience here, what are their biggest challenges with their current software engineering practices? And then maybe we can start there.
Yeah, and we have 55 people watching at the moment. So I don't expect 55 questions at the same time, but no questions. You're muted, Steve. Stefan says, biggest challenge is changing processes on the panel. Andrea, getting people to work together as a team. And Hope Harrison is saying how to make customers happy when they have unrealistic expectations. All of those are really good, and I could spend an hour on one of those. Which one do you want to start with, Jeremy? I'm a people person, so I would go with that one. But
yeah, me too. Yeah, so you want to address the customer or your team? Sometimes the customer's part of your team.
Yeah, both are actually people related. One of the things that we do at Delacorp, when customers ask for code and they say they want a turnkey solution, but they ask for the source code because they want to maintain it themselves, and they want us to add on the quote some magic training session at the end, I'm like, no, that's not gonna happen. You have to be on our weekly meetings or bi-weekly meetings, however we decide the frequency is, because if you're going to be maintaining the code, you need to be there when most of these decisions were made, and also help us prioritize really what we need to be working on. So I think by having them have some skin in the game, as opposed to just waiting for a gift at the end of whatever period, has helped a lot. Also on how, like, just them seeing, for example, I do a lot of unit testing. So just them seeing the unit test. And when they say, why don't you just do this? It's just a simple thing. And then I tell them, well, this breaks 55% of the unit tests, right? They know what I'm talking about because I have been showing it to them. So that's one way. Jeremy, how do you do it?
Well, so Andre said in chat, talk. And that's really, you will have customers that just want to like throw their project over the wall and just want you to return it, fully featured exactly like they dreamed it. But it's not really practical. So it's you can do a lot, but at some point you have to have periodic, iterative, like collaboration sessions so that you're constantly you're constantly confirming or adapting their expectations to what you as a team decided that you would achieve.
And then there's a difference between expectations, wants, and needs, right? And I feel like as architects, we need to figure out what are the needs. People are really good to expressing their wants, but they're not so good at expressing their expectations and their needs. Like they don't really know what is it that they need to solve, that they're trying to solve. So asking the right questions to figure out if what they're requesting as a feature, it's a need, a want, or part of an expectation.
Yeah. And other thing I would note is that it's really important to get feedback and input from all your stakeholders. So that would be the person who brought you into the project because they have a business need, your technical lead on your customer side to make sure that you are interfacing properly, the end users to make sure that you give them something they will enjoy using and they will remember your name positively, and and then of course your team, just to get sanity check on is this design feasible? And so I think it's really important to include all of those people, and that's very early in the project.
Yeah.
I hear you,
Steve, how do you deal? How do you deal with expectations, unrealistic expectations from customers? How do you deal with them?
I think you have to bury down. I think everything comes down to what do they really want. So the unrealistic expectations are, at the end, they want something. You know, they have an expectation. They may not be able to put it across into words, but I mean, so I'll give you an example of a requirement spec I had last week, which had 2 items on it to do with the hardware, and one was it must be in the smallest envelope possible, and the next requirement after it was needs room to expand and modify. And you think, yeah, well, that's an impossible requirement, but what do they actually want from that requirement? You know, what is the thing they're looking for, but not putting it into words? So it's a lot of it is communication. It's not that they're unrealistic. It's that they haven't put it across exactly what the actual problem is they're trying to solve with that requirement. So I think a lot of that comes down to sort of experience and just talking to people, and sort of like Andre says, talk, but you have to wheedle out actually what it is that is the pain for them that they're trying to solve with this requirement.
One thing I told my team is the fastest we give the customer what they don't want, the fastest we figure out what is it that they need. So I'd rather release something too early that it's like, you know, it's like when a builder takes you through a house walk and all you see are the beams and they're just telling you, well, picture here, X, Y, you know, the room starts here, and it's really hard to visualize because, you know, we're not architects. It's the same thing is taking, not be afraid to show your customers the building aspect. So in the case, for example, of DQMH, we let them play with the API testers. So they may be very, very rough, but it's impressive how fast you get. Oh, I forgot to tell you, right? I have one example with a customer that was managing some motors, stepper motors for some syringes and mechanic arms. And I gave them the API tester that basically moved all the different stages around. And they're like, oh yeah, by the way, if you move from point A to point C, you basically break all the crystal vials that we have on the way. And they didn't have any way to realize that. Well, they probably would have if they had done some CAD drawings, but they figured it out until, you know, they were able to test it. And them testing it early means we didn't have to wait until the last minute to fix that.
Yeah, and writing requirements is really hard. So I think some sympathy for your customer has to go on. What you normally find is the bit that's within their expert domain is really filled out. So, you know, if they're really into sort of measurements, you'll get a very big requirements section on measurements. And then you go, well, how do you want to store it? Well, no, I haven't thought of that. How do you want to report it? Oh, no, I haven't thought about that.
Yeah.
And actually, for me, the measurements is a very minor part of the job. You know, getting a measurement is a tiny part of the job, whereas user interfaces, reporting and databasing, and it has a lot of implications.
Or the opposite.
And they often don't even appear. So we always class them as sort of hidden requirements. Those ones is actually every single measurement logging project will have calibration, will have a report, will have a database of some description to store the data, will have a requirement to report that in some form, and you tick those off, and they're sort of nodes, you know, and so it's being aware of the hidden requirements and the time that is, you know, around those. I mean, if, for example, a customer comes up with screens that need a lot of manual input, that's a big job. People think, oh, no, it's just a few, you know, user interfaces, and it's a few bits of data you plug into a dialog box. Oh, no. If you've got a database and putting data in, you've got to police that data, you've got to make sure bits of it are unique, you've got, and there's lots of sort of things you have to take into account with some requirements, and which can be thought of as easy. So anyway, I think in essence, it's, I don't know. I never see them really as unrealistic. You just have to talk them down.
And it depends also on the customer, because you were saying, they focus too much on the measurements and not on the GUI. I've had the opposite too, where they're just so worried about how the app looks that they don't answer the questions you need about data rates and stuff like that. Bill Welch, Karsten Dahlmeyer brought a good point that the customer never knows what he needs and rarely what he really wants, and the needs and wishes change every week. Definitely, I've seen that. Bill Welch is saying, have you ever found an operations engineer writes the requirements without talking to the techs and the operators? How do you draw the balance between them? So I'm going to paste on the chat a link for the Inception deck. I've done that exercise with different levels of detail, but I ask when we're having the first meeting to go through that presentation together, and just the questions that you ask, and there's a slide that says who is in the team, and it's always bigger than you think. So some of the things that I learned, for example, from Steve, remember your presentation at CERN, Steve, that you said the earlier you talk to the IT guy and really understand what the restrictions are, the better off you're going to be. Because it's horrible that you do these PXI system with compact Rio, etc., and you arrive to the facility to connect it, and the IT people are like, nope, unrecognized computer in the system, go install virus scanner and all sorts of automatic stuff onto the PXI, and they ruin everything, right? So I think that's, if you can check it out, it's also part of the book. It's the first chapter on that book. And that link that I posted there has a way to download the slides. So I recommend that.
Yeah, I mean, me, for my comfort zone, I always go to the end user, right? Because they're the ones, if a process is a bit dodgy, they get around it, and then it becomes habit, and then it becomes the way they work, and then it becomes written down somewhere, and actually it's instilled, and you can sort of sit there and go, well, why did you do it that way then? Whereas when you're dealing with operations managers and higher up, they don't see any of that, they don't know any of that. So you get, but I mean, you view all the stakeholders as people you can get information off, and if you can bring them in and not be in an antagonistic relationship, and I take the piss out of IT all the time, but actually, if you can get them on side, they're really quite useful. So it's, I mean, I've got a system that does sort of lots of UDP packeted stuff, so IT get in my way all the time, and the best way to attack that is to sort of bring them in and say, look, I need your advice. I need you to tell me how I can write my software so that, I'm not causing your system problems. And it's talking to people like that gets you quite a long way, and it's, if they feel part of the team, then generally you get a lot more help, because they're all frustrated software engineers anyway. So if you give them a little bit of a little bit of a fillet, they go for it usually.
Like Chris Clark is saying, help them find what they really want with prototypes early and often, or like I said, just a scaffolding code, like in our case, API testers for DQMH, just something that where they can press buttons and start seeing things. Because again, the faster that you give them what they don't want, the faster that they tell you what they need. So Jeremy, what do you want to add to that, or do you want to switch?
A lot of times they have not thought it through completely themselves, and so it is a voyage of discovery with your customer. The very first question we got is actually a really, really good one. Stefan Lemon said the biggest challenge is changing processes. So Stefan, I'm assuming you're talking about with your software team. So Fabiola or Steve, what would your off-the-cuff first thing be? Because this is hard no matter how you do it.
Yeah, no, I mean, you've heard me say before that sometimes I think Nancy is the one that called me the psychologist of LabVIEW, or the LabVIEW psychologist, because I try to go in and talk to the different tech leads of the teams and understand why they do things the way they do. Normally, when you have resistance to changing processes, is because they have been doing it their way long time, and they don't see a benefit on doing it differently. Like this morning during the presentation on my journey to SVN to Git from Olivier Jordan, there were people there that saying, I don't see why I would, like, SVN works for me, why would I change? But they had never tried Git. Like, they really don't even know why they don't like it. They haven't gone there, right?
Yeah.
So it's a lot of figuring out what are the fears to change, what are the pushback to change, and then try to figure out how to make it either less traumatizing to make the jump through. For example, one of the teams that I helped to go from SVN to Mercurial back then, the tech lead was the one that just couldn't figure out the two-step, commit, push, pull update. And finally, what I did is I configured his, and back then we were using, I think we were using Taurus SG, and I configured it so it would be a single step. And I told him, this is just, how would you go, like crutch, right? Just to get you through the whole transition way. And as soon as he started seeing how it was helping his team, it took a while, it took a couple of months, but he was like, hey Fab, I'm ready. How can I turn that off, right? Now I see what is it that I'm missing. So it is be willing to be there long term. Changes are not going to happen from one day to the next. So you have to be very patient. You have to choose your battles. But the first thing is understanding what are those fears to change that people have.
Yeah, so I've had
Sorry, Jeremy, go.
So in my experience, it's really easy to get like a bunch of people to buy in on something just by showing them how it benefits them, right? But the challenge is that there's always a few stragglers that just really don't want to adopt. And so you've got, 2/3 of the team that like they love this tool set, for example, but the other 1/3 of the team is just doing it because they have to, because everybody else is using that tool set. And it's that last part that's really challenging.
Yeah, the other one is like the one time I was brought in as a consultant, and the customer sent me the emails from the team, and they were like, we don't understand why we need to have a consultant in software engineering. We're not software engineers, we're test engineers. So, I mean, we had to even go back to, you are writing software, the language happens to be LabVIEW, but you are doing software. And the fact that you don't even realize that you're doing software, it's the beginning of the problems, right? It's like that's the root cause of a lot of the problems and the pushback that they had. And it was, a lot of it was just not lack of self-confidence. How can I, without any education, call myself a software engineer? And it's like, dude, you know more about software than some software programmers that have a computer science degree that I have met. So it turned out it was just a self-confidence issue. And I only got to that by talking to them, that they just didn't feel like they had the right to call themselves software engineers.
Steve, I want to hear what you have to say.
Generally, the way we work is, if we like it, we carry on doing it. If we find that there's a reason that particular process isn't gelling, we modify it, and it's a democratic sort of thing that we try to tackle it. And I mean, in my company, there's lots of gnarly old engineers like me there's a few that and getting us to work in the same way can be quite difficult. And being I've got the QA head and the ISO 9000 head, it's quite an effort to get everyone working in a similar fashion. But the other thing is to not be afraid to throw away processes that aren't working. And because that's essential to sort of agile, really, and it's one of the bits of it I quite like is that, well, if it's not working and it's a bit of an effort and not everyone's bought in, then it's not quite right as a process. I mean, there will be people in the team that are anti everything, and perhaps they shouldn't be in the team. But
I knew that was coming.
But
sometimes firing a team
I'm not the
member
nicest person in the whole world.
Sometimes firing is an option. We were talking about that with a lady that my husband and I are mentoring, and she's studying at university, and she was like, "But how do you make it work? With somebody in your team doesn't want to work." And we're like, "Well, they're offering you an option to do real life things, right? Because the teacher was saying that she needed to solve the problem on her own because that's what she was going to be facing in real life." And both Luis and I were like, in real life, you can fire someone that's not pulling their weight. So you can go back to the professor and say, we got to that point where we already tried A, B, C, and D, and these team member just doesn't want to help. But it was really funny to me that she didn't see that as an option. Like it was unthinkable that she could just go to the professor and say, we're firing this person from our team. Like she didn't see it as an option.
No. Well, I mean, I think
Yes, Normandine, François Noaden is saying, having never worked in government, he's totally right. I know that you cannot just fire someone.
Yes, we're lucky. I never want to be. One of the sort of things you have to consider, though, is that having 4 people work the same way, design the same way, write similar code is enormously valuable. And it doesn't even have to be the best way. There's endless conversations at these sort of summits about, this is 0.007 better than this way of doing it. Well, just do something. And then the talk about changing processes. Well, most companies with more than one software engineer I've ever gone into don't have a process. Each software engineer has a process, but the company doesn't have a process. Very few. And the LabVIEW world is full of companies like that, I'm afraid. And I know I tried to sort of say it at iWeek a couple of years back. It's just have a process, then you can modify it. If bits of it, but just have one, because you've got then this foundation that you can improve upon.
And on that one, I mean, Steve, one of the things that we do at VSH workshops is we send a survey right before we do a workshop, and we ask that everyone on the team answers it, because the manager is going to tell you, oh, our process is X. But when you ask the people, the answer is going to be very different. And I have some stories on the book, on the chapter on working with teams about those surveys. It's so interesting to see how detached the view of the tech lead and the manager is from the team members on what their process is or what the tools that they use are.
No, that's because everything's easy for project managers because they just tell people what to do. So it's not the same when you're actually writing code.
So what do you think, Jeremy?
But Stefan says, I don't wait for the right moment to modify the process. And
yeah, that's never going to happen. Yeah, don't wait for.
But part of your process should be to modify your process. I mean, I've talked about project postmortems for a long time, and I bet nobody doesn't. But that's your point, to modify your process, because that's the only point in doing a project postmortem. It's not to pat everyone on the back and say how well everything went. It's to say, well, we were a bit exposed when we did this. How do we
make it better,
organize that exposure, or mitigate against that exposure next time? You don't have to do it. I mean, we are fairly happy with our process now, but so we do it a lot less. But if we have a project go horribly wrong, or even if you have a project that makes stupid amounts of money, I wish, you those are two outliers, and they're the times you should probably then say, well, we ought to post-mortem this to see what we did right or what we did wrong, so that we can rectify it the next time round. And it has modified the way we work doing it like that, and it's been a very valuable addition to our tools.
I think the lesson there is do not underestimate the power of small changes. Right, don't want to go from not having a process to having a complete process. Don't want to go from building everything on your computer to having a continuous integration server. No, first just put a computer next to your computer and make it a build server. It doesn't have to be automatic. Just the process of building in a separate computer is going to be telling you a lot about your process. One thing we do is we do the postmortems, but more in a small thing. We do a big postmortem when we deliver a project, but on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, we meet and we talk about what's working, what needs improvement, and what was the highlight of the week. And the information that I gather from that is, well, when something is said what needs improvement, I always ask, how can we make it better? So it maybe create a new analyzer test, maybe the code review would have fixed it, maybe putting it on the README. And that's how we take care of those issues. And the highlight, it starts to give me a picture of what is it that people enjoy. And it is funny because you cannot just ask a programmer, what is the part that you like? A mender, a software mender, someone who likes to refactor code might not realize that that's what they like. Like when you ask them, what is your favorite part on software? They might say, the UI. But you know that the last 10 times that you have talked to them, their highlight of the week had to do with refactoring something. So it's starting to be like, okay, now I know what type of projects or what type of cases I can assign to you. So that has helped me also a lot. I was watching, I don't know if you guys saw the Comey Rule movie, and one of the things that they were talking about is that Comey would always ask people, what's your favorite candy? And he knew what was the favorite candy from the janitor to the generals that he was working with. So I think then getting to know what makes a person tick can get you a long ways.
Yeah.
So Andre is just saying that. So the problem is that workload makes it difficult. Well, I would say that's on your Pareto of things to modify. Is that must be then your first point of call. How do you make your workload less difficult? So you're getting no time to sharpen your tools. So for one, because all you're doing is plan a film.
Andre's gonna join us.
Yeah.
Jeremy, before we get Andre in, Jeremy, do you guys treat G Systems as a customer?
What's that?
Do you guys treat G Systems as a customer?
Yes, I do. Yeah,
our Jeremy's like looking at me like, we
I'm
do
looking down
have.
at Steve like, what? Yeah.
We have, each one of our customers has an ID, a Jira project, a Harvest ID, a project name, a repository, a budget. So when we are looking
at
how
we have initiatives, and they get their own they don't get their own job IDs, they get their own workspaces, and postmortems are a great time to review and find things, but other times are just when team members start like crying mercy that there's something that's extra painful about what they have to do, and that will definitely initiate a change, and you have immediate buy-in from people to participate in that because it makes their life easier.
It's like, solve this, please.
You run your own company, don't you, Andre?
Andre, what is it that you wanted to say, Andre?
No, I just thought I'd just make it live because otherwise the typing isn't going that fast. No, it's mainly because we have lots of smaller projects distributed that people have multiple customers that they serve. They get interrupted by multiple customers. And it's difficult to get an overview of what everybody is doing, so that if you have a bigger project that has more attention, that has multiple people working on it, that you sort of get that the right attention, but also be able to serve all the other stuff that also needs to be served, and to be able to organize that.
So the way we did
Do you prioritize your customers?
Go ahead, Steve.
Do you prioritize your customers? Because we did that a few years back, and we did I think at the start of the year, we said, these customers are really, really important. Don't tell customers that we do this. These customers, are essential to our business.
Yeah, we do. Yeah.
These customers are not so essential to our business. Yeah. This is a one-off job for one company, and they're going to go away and never come back. And having that grading does help with some of this mayhem, because I'm a pleaser. I want to respond.
I can agree with that. We have sort of the same take on things. Like service is the most important thing for the long-term relationship. And I must say, we have a lot of return from the same customers over the years. So it's basically these bigger and continuous returning customers that are sort of adding these extra intermediate actions in between. But they are, over the years, they have such a big investment with us that you just need to sort of keep them happy, because the next big project they will also put in your lap.
So one thing, Andrea, and this was difficult, and it's not something that took overnight. My largest customer, we educated him. He used to be 3 or 4 emails a day, phone calls directly to the different team members, because he knew exactly who on the team was working on what. He would even text them or send them messages through Skype. And of course, then, you would get all the cross communication, because nobody, like, he would tell me something and then would tell something else to the other team members, right? So what we did, and these, like, again, it took time, but we educated him we meet on Mondays. On Mondays, we prioritize. We call it triage, because it's really not a sprint planning. It's more like a triage. And we are focusing on what are the 5 things that are the most important to you this week. And then anytime, and you're only going to communicate with this person this week, right? And anytime he would send something, it would be like, okay, it is on the backlog for triage for next week. On the backlog for triage for next week. After a couple of weeks of doing that, we were able to show him that every time that he was interrupting with, this is the most important thing now, and we would have 3 or 4 of, this is the most important thing now, by the next week, it was no longer the most important thing. By the 3rd or 4th triage, some of those things that we didn't work on because they got sent to the backlog while we were working were actually dropped. So we were able to show him how he was saving money, because we did not change context to address the most important thing or the little thing that he wanted on that day. Again, it took time, and it's one thing about delivering and showing the value added. I recommend a book. It's called Joy Inc., and it talks about that, about making the customer part of your team prioritization sessions and training them not to interrupt the development during the week or the 2 weeks or whatever you decide is going to be your iteration, your sprint, whatever you want to call it.
But then you have like 10 to 12 customers that you need to sort of educate, or you educate the team to make sure that
both. You have to educate both, Andre. You have to educate both, because it is the team not picking up the phone. It is the team not picking up the phone. And it is the customer not contacting directly. And it takes time, and it's going to be, because it's a cultural thing now for your company, right? So are you going to do it for all the customers at once? No, pick one, try it with that one. And then once you figure out what works, pick the next one. And hopefully little by little, you're going to get to having all your customers trained, your team trained.
And one thing I would say is that there has to be a return on investment. So if you're putting a process in that's slowing people down, again, I'd be looking at that process. That's maybe, I mean, I've worked for aerospace companies and the processes were heavy and annoying and they slowed everything down, and probably for good reason, but the issues that caused tainted my view really, and for me there has to be a return on investment for this whole exercise. So that the reason to have a process is to improve it, but the other reason is that it should make your projects more predictable. It should protect you from a project going terribly wrong, because you've got the steps in the way to be able to estimate a bit better, to be able to identify risks a bit better. So these kind of things are being really taken in your step, you know, and you automate a lot of it. I mean, we automate a lot of our process. So all the documentation is pretty much automated, and that saves you time. But you'll then, everyone's running to the same set of documentation. They're running to the same set of tools. They're running to the same templates. They're running to and you can chip away at that particular these improvements and wrap it up. You know, you can have an overall picture in your head about where you want to be, which is, you know, for us it was ISO 9000 and things like that, which I needed. But you could say, well, yeah, but I'm not just going to make it a load of extra work, because we've already got a good process, because you're already churning out good software. You can't do that without a process of some sort. It's there. It's just not been formalized.
There's a good comment from Hope. Well, she said that what I'm just saying is going to change her whole development process with her customers that call her every week, and then they complain that they're not meeting the goals. One of the things that I also do, Hope, is tell them when they come and insist on adding something to the list is, what are we dropping? Like, we had already picked what were the top 5 or the top 3 for this week. If I take care of that one that you're asking for now, which one do we drop from the ones that we had already agreed?
Yeah, ultimately it comes down to like a value decision, right? Every single time. And it's the same way when you're doing when you're talking about changing your processes or modifying your processes. You know, it may be that, you know, right now we're just going to keep patching the roof, but we know that at some point there's going to be a tipping point where it benefits us more to re-roof than to to replace the roof than to keep patching it. And sometimes those patches actually help, because they help guide, you know, what your plan is going to be when you do the rework, when you rework the whole process.
Another thing on that Agile Inception deck, Hope, that is in there. There's a couple of slides with levers that help you figure out what are the things that your customer values the most. Time, scope. There's the four ones: quality, time, scope, and I'm missing the 4 one. If I was in my office, I would have it. No, that's already there. So it's time, scope, quality, and cost. Yeah. So those are the 4 ones. And it is amazing what you can get. Like, we are used to, most of the people, our cost is their lever, right? But every now and then, especially when you get to work with marketing teams to do like demos for trade shows, it's amazing. For the same company, working with the R&D department versus working with the marketing department, totally different levels. And, you know, when you're working where money is not the problem, but the time is, because you need to have the demo ready by the trade show date, your decisions are going to be very different. Like for one trade show that we worked on, we could buy 2-3 compact Rios and have PXIs, you know, on the back to be able to replace. It was incredible. So it is important to also know what is the value system for your customer. Do they value time, money, quality, scope? The one that I tell my customers I'm not going to compromise on is quality. But the other 3, we do need to figure out, when push comes to shove, which one is the one that we're moving. So Katya is asking, what falls into process?
Yeah, that's a great question. So these are all the things that aren't actually just writing software, that wrap around the job of making software. So let's go right from the start. So you get an inquiry. at that point, you should probably get in a conversation with your customer about what they want and try and ascertain what they want. So, I mean, for us, we make a list of requirements eventually, and that goes into a spreadsheet. That spreadsheet is a template. It's got the bits that we need to fill in. And against each requirement, we add a risk factor. So now we're beginning to think. So this is the process is helping us ask the right questions. And then from that, we would produce, a quote. Because we do fixed price, we'll take a bit of a punt and do a fixed price quote. But if we don't have it, if those risk numbers are too high, then that's telling us we have to go back and do a bit more. So right at the start, you've got some sort of process going on, and people do this, just by themselves. They make a guess, but ours is a guess on paper. So then and that the different processes will take you all the way through. It's right to the. Ultimately it's to delivering working software and me getting paid. That's the end of the whole project, and then you do the post-mortem.
Steve always says delivery is the thing, right? So one exercise that I use when I'm coaching teams, and I ask them, what's your process? And they look at me like, what do you mean process? I ask them, if we were to write a checklist of all the things that you need to do to release your project, what would be on that list? So we start on the whiteboard and we start adding things on between, right? And that's how we start getting to at least what their process is at that moment. And then we get into the discovering what is it that they don't know, right? Because they don't know what they don't know. So one of the things after we do that exercise is figuring out where they're lacking. So for example, source code control, unit testing, building a different computer, all that type of stuff. But first is just list what are all the things that you do from the moment the customer calls you to the moment you deliver the project. What are all those? And then that's going to help you figure out what your process is. And then you'll have to assess what parts of that process are working and which ones need improvement.
And literally our full process, ISO 9000 improved process, is probably at maximum 10 documents, but our first document is a thing we call a project plan, which allows us to do less, because essentially the project plan says how the project's going to be run. So you don't need 10. If somebody just wants a simple driver, you don't need 10 pages of sort of document for that. You just bang it into the project plan and say, we'll do it. It'll take a week. Here you go. So it has to be adaptable. I mean, I like the agility and discipline type approach. Is discipline's good, but you've got to be able to move as well and act like a small company. Because the mistaken thing is people get hamstrung by their process, and you get. You give it to a QA department whose job is to enforce processes rather than leave it with the software engineers who can build a process, that's effective and usable. But no, you give it to a QA, and then the whole thing becomes a battle, and that's wrong. So if you work in a big company, keep your process to yourselves. As a software don't tell your QA department that you've got a process, but it's useful, because the point is it's useful. It protects you. It helps make everything more predictable.
So Amanda's question is going to disappear from the chat, so I don't want it to let it go. So she said, "What are you evaluating for risk, timing, and cost?" So this goes back to what I said earlier. It will depend on what are the values for your customer. So not all customers is cost. Some of them is going to be scope. So based on that, you figure out how to weight your risks. Steve does it a little bit different. He has, I'm going to search while Jeremy or Steve answer. I'm going to search for Steve's article on risk assessment. So let me do a search for that. You guys can talk while I search.
Yeah, so essentially, if we don't understand it fully, it will get a 5 on a scale of 1 to 5. And that just means that we're not willing to quote it at that point. And it's an indication that we need to go back to the customer and either mitigate or understand that risk. So, sometimes you'll get it must be future-proof. What does that mean? It's just, what I've got to prove it against the zombie apocalypse and a star blowing up. Define future and define proof. So those kind of things need numbers put against them, essentially, because that's the business we're in. Is we need to stick a number against our effort. Jeremy did a very good presentation at NI Week. When did we do it back to back, Jeremy? It was a good one.
Oh,
presentation. That was all.
That was a few years ago. Are you talking about planning for changes and yeah? So one of the things, this is not necessarily risk related, but it's it kind of overlaps a bit. As software engineers, we're always trying to figure out how will this change in the future, right? How will this shape change? Is it going to be that they take this exact same thing and put it on 10 more stations? Is it that they're going to add a bunch of new functionality with this? Are they going to have a new product that has new features that need new test types? And are they going to need the whole thing to run 10 times faster? And trying to guess, in early conversations, trying to figure out what those possible directions are. Some of them you can eliminate. And then when you go to do your project, don't implement anything for that. Just design for future implementation. So minimize the amount of implementation you do for something that may or may not happen in the future. But if you can decide to do things this way or that way, and that it's going to give you that's going to score you big points later if you chose the right one, and it makes the project a lot easier. Because I think, like Andre said, a lot of us, we have a lot of repeat customers. They come back over and over, and every time your job is to make them a hero in their own organization.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the other thing with all this risk is that once you've sort of said, well, okay, now the risk has been mitigated to a point I want to carry on with the project, is you then take all the riskiest parts and you attack them first, because the other part of having a process, any process, is to train you to do the things that you wouldn't naturally want to do. So, for example, a post-mortem is about asking the uncomfortable questions. The risk mitigation is about getting that stuff out quick, because the worst time to be tackling a risky part of the project is at the end, and everyone leaves it to the end. Oh, that's difficult. I'll do this nice, easy bit first. And that's utterly and completely the wrong way to tackle a project.
That's the second link I put there, lesson 8, push risk forward. That was Steve's article on that.
Okay.
Go ahead, Jeremy.
Yeah, and I will say, don't be shy about when you build your risk table, don't be shy about sharing that with your customer, right? Because you need to educate them on these are the things that you can do that put your own project at risk or that help reduce the risk of your own project. And the whole goal is that they're on board with your set.
And again, I'll do the general process thing. The point of having a process as part of your software engineering process, having written things, is that they can be a stick that you can beat your customer with, because you've done it. And you say, well, I've done the work. And it's saved us many times just having a piece of paper that says, look, I've got these numbers here that everything's a risk 5. Nothing I can do about it. It's our process. I can't carry on. Damn the process.
Going back to college, I went to a college that they basically train company management. Right? It's a school for a lot of rich kids that their parents already have companies and they're going to be managing them. That was not my case. But one of the things that they kept repeating to us is, you never say, I told you so. And one thing that I have learned is that you do say "I told you so," but you have to figure out how you say it, right? It's not. Yeah, it's really it's really saying, okay, we're gonna do it your way because you're the customer, but you need to do it as an informed decision. So let me tell you my expert opinion, and if then after that you still want to do it your way, we will do it your way. But let me document here that I did tell you that my expert opinion was that this was going to be the result of that action. So when you get to the end and you have to turn around because everything you predicted happens, you totally say, I told you so. That's, remember when we had this discussion? So that is part of also educating your customer, being able to go back and say, this is why I was suggesting to do it this way. And this is where I have been able to turn a personality disorder into a wonderful business. Because while being a know-it-all and telling people, I told you so, will probably not work on most businesses. As a consultant, I can get away with it. So, but it's just a matter of how you say it. But it really, really is important not to just do what the customer says, and then at the end you get blamed for being late, even though it was them who sent you that curveball, right? So communication, that's the main thing.
So
we don't say the customer is always right. We just say what they want is always right.
So we are actually out of time. So do you want to jump over to the breakout session room and keep talking with people?
Yeah. We can go there, and please join us on the video thing. So it's not the three of us just talking.
Yeah.
So see you at the breakout room.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.